guys, and welcome back to the Puro Wrestling Academy podcast. This is the audio version of the program. I am Ray Russell, and this week, guys, as promised, it's been a long time in the making, but we have finally arrived to 1963, late December back in 63. Oh my, what a very special time for quite a few people, but one in particular, and we're going to let the man back out of this program to tell us all about it. Welcome back to the show, the professor of Puro Wrestling himself, Mr. Dan Ginnetty.
Thank you, Ray, and welcome back, everybody. We've got quite the show for you today. This is 1963 in the world of Japanese professional wrestling. I can't even classify the importance of this year. You will all learn why as we go through it, but it is momentous. Some might say that this is the end of the first era of Japanese pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Well, it would be in Japan, of course. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot of information from inside the ring and outside the ring. We're going to have articles from the newspapers of that time. We're going to have stories that occur outside the ring that play into what happens with wrestling in general and this promotion specifically. It's action-packed, so to speak. And we're going to get the fifth World League, which is the super popular, it's kind of the precursor to the Champion Carnival for all Japan. Mm-hmm. It's the big tournament that draws a lot of famous wrestlers from outside of Japan and draws tons of money for Rikidozan. So it's very popular. Everyone seems to love it, and we're going to get more and more of it this year.
Well, I want to do the keynotes at this point, Dan, but I don't know how deep we're going to get into 63 because we have a lot of stuff happening on the back end. However, we're going to discuss a little bit about Rikidozan, certainly in getting engaged, perhaps getting married here in the year of 1963. Also, Giant Baba going to be returning from his long-tenured trip out to the United States. He's heading back to Japan. The World League, as you touched on, lots of great gaijin, foreign talent coming in. Haystacks Calhoun, Killer Kowalski, the great Gino Marella, a.k.a. Gorilla Monsoon. Pat O'Connor is going to be here. And I almost went right over his name because I got so used to seeing him on our video cast. I'm talking about the Destroyer going to be here as well.
Yeah, the Destroyer coming into Japan is a major, major event. And as we cover the history of Japanese wrestling moving forward into the 70s, the Destroyer will become more and more of a fixture in Japan. So this is the genesis of all of that. And we'll be able to follow it right from the start in 1963.
We've got more tours later in the year featuring Boiled Haggerty, Don Jardine, who would eventually become the spoiler, the masked spoiler, and move over Mr. Atomic. You want to talk about masked characters. Mr. Zero. I like that name. Mr. Zero coming to Japan here in 1963. Plus, is Sumo rigged? I don't know. And if we get to it, Dan, at the very end of the year, going to have to let the cat out of the bag and give everybody a little teaser just in case we get to it this week.
If we get to it, we're going to be covering the death of Rikidozan.
Wow, that's, you can't really do enough justice in hyping everything that goes into that. I mean, we've talked about he's the godfather of Japanese professional wrestling. He's been everything to building wrestling here in Japan for the past however many years now. And unfortunately, in December of 63, Rikidozan murdered. And we'll definitely be getting to it. If not on this episode, certainly going to be a large piece of topic for the next episode. But it's just all about getting there. And if we have the time this week, but rest assured, guys, the entire world of Japanese professional wrestling going to be shaken up and will never be the same again after this year.
Absolutely. And I just remembered a story of a scatological nature that I can reveal when we get to that point when I watched a Killer Kowalski shoot interview. So just I'll have that in my back pocket and I will reveal that when the appropriate time comes.
Very good, Dan. Well, the bell is sounding. I'll let you get rolling with class.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please take your seats. Class is in session.
Away we go.
Well, let's start at the beginning. The first tour of the year, as they are always creatively titled, this is called Pro Wrestling Spring International Matches, because it's not spring, and I have no
That's right.
explanation for the title. January 4th to March 15th, 1963, 23 matches total. So this should probably tip you off. If you've been following along the prior episodes, 23 matches that cover almost 3 months, that sounds like it lines up with television. So I'm assuming the vast majority of the shows on this tour are going to be televised, but we'll see what happens when we get to it. It's the first series of the year. Jess Ortega, who was in the last series of 1962, stuck around, and he's going to be in this series along with another masked wrestler. Japan and masked wrestlers, I guess it was easy money. You wouldn't keep doing them if the fans didn't like them. There's a never-ending run on list of masked wrestlers. This one is the Executioner. The one thing I do want to note about this tour is that the first 8 shows are in the Kanto region of Japan, and then the next group of 4 in Aichi and Gifu prefectures. And then the last 9 shows of the tour back in the Kanto region. And the Kanto region is the area that has Tokyo in it. So what they're trying to do with this tour is it was held with low expenses because transportation costs were very low. Almost everything was based out of Tokyo. And I think that might be part of a strategy to maximize revenue without having to lay out a lot of costs for all the promotional accommodations, transportation, hotel rooms. It's a way to run a tour on the cheap if you can draw enough fans and stay in one area the entire time. This methodology would be employed for some of the major tournaments. New Japan's G1 Climax tournament, the final shows, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row, would all be, it would be in Ryogoku Kokukiken Sumo Hall. So you have all these shows in the same place, so no one has to move, no one has to drive anywhere, everything's in the same area. So you end up maximizing the revenue off of those shows because you're not laying out as much money. And this is just one of the examples. Granted, it's back in 1963. We'll go right to it. We're seeing a lot of Jesse Ortega and Baron von Hess in the main events, tagging with folks like Rikidozan, Toyonobori, Mishiaki Yoshimura. Same guys, same everywhere. And if you notice, Rikidozan, Toyonobori, and Yoshimura are in the main event. Semi-main is probably going to have Kokichi Endo, Rikidozan's number 1 guy, and sure enough, that's where he is. The very first match of this year, though, the first house show of the year, I want to also mention that Antonio Inoki has worked his way up to 8th match on a 10-match card. So that shows that there is an investment in Antonio Inoki, and although he's not getting the royal treatment in America yet, he hasn't done his American excursion. As a rookie from just 2 years ago, he's already in the match right before the semi-main event, and I consider that a major push for Antonio Inoki.
Yeah, you know what else I notice on these cards now? Umanosuke Ueda begins to pop up. I believe we mentioned that briefly last time around. Now he's kind of in that Inoki spot on the undercard, but it's fun to see that name because we know moving forward he's going to pop up over the next, say, 20 years in the wrestling business. So it's fun to see some of these names begin to trickle in.
Yeah, and he would be known as a shooter in his younger days. There would be kind of amusing matches when he was way towards the end of his career against Akira Maeda. But at this point, Umanosuke Ueda was just starting out, and he would be a major foe for Antonio Inoki moving forward in the 70s. He was one of the first freelancers of note, and he had a great gimmick, and he was crazy, and you'll get a chance to hear about it and possibly see some of his antics in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, Inoki working his way well up the card, but he's very happy that Baba's been gone because Inoki's been groomed into, I don't want to say Baba's spot, but he's certainly been moving all the way up the card. And I notice here you talk about the first show of the year in the semi-main event, just in case anybody's wondering how this pecking order is working. Inoki in the 8th match on the card, the 9th match on the card, Kokichi Endo defeating Kentaro Oki in a 2 out of 3 fall match. So just in case you guys were wondering where everybody fell, Endo's still the right-hand man of Rikidozan at the end of the day.
Yep, and we had alluded to what we thought was the formation of a new 3-headed snake with Inoki, Baba, and Oki all getting pushed and all moving up the card. And if you look at this, 2 of the 3 of them are already there. And it's almost like new guard versus old guard, where they were able to accomplish this in a very short amount of time, just a couple of years, and they're already knocking on the door of the established top dogs with Rikidozan, Toyonobori, Yoshimura, and Endo. So it looks like there is a plan for Oki and a plan for Inoki. If Inoki thinks he's not being treated well, I don't know what more they could have done with him at this point in 1963 after only 2 years of wrestling. This match will be televised. Inoki would not be on it, just the last 2 matches, the Endo-Oki match and the 6-man tag. And before we could even have the next show on the tour, because remember, there's only 23 matches out of a 2.5-month tour, on January 6th, Rikidozan, at the time 38 years old, possibly 40, but we already talked about his birth date being something of speculation. Sure. He announced his engagement to Kiko Tanaka, a 21-year-old flight attendant of Japan Airlines.
Way to go, Ricky.
Wow, good for him. Well, he is a superstar. He's a celebrity, so there's something about celebrities. He said he had fallen in love at first sight on a plane when she was the first woman he thought of that would give him some peace of mind. And I said peace of mind. Her father was the chief of the Chigasaki police station in the Kanagawa prefecture, so her dad is a police chief, who of course was opposed to his daughter marrying the super famous pro wrestler, almost twice her age. But Rikidozan managed to persuade him through various means, and that is not specified.
Lots of yen.
Yeah, Keiko wrote a book that was published in 2003, and when she told him that her father suffered from lower back pain, he bought expensive medicine imported from the United States and presented it to him after he wrestled. Her father softened over time and became fond of Rikidozan. It was reported that Rikidozan was in relationships with other women and had to break those ties before the marriage. The previous year, there were rumors that Rikidozan would be engaged to the daughter of a man who owned a large hotel in Nagata, but those rumors were unfounded. He tried to keep Keiko's existence secret, but the media smelled it out and gave it massive coverage. Shortly before Rikidozan's public announcement, Tokyo Sports got the scoop and announced it. So you have a sports periodical, a sports newspaper finding out about this, and it was enough, newsworthy enough for them to report it. That's how big of a deal Rikidozan was. Almost like some of the soccer stars in other parts of the world where soccer coverage is so huge that the outside of the pitch information and news is also important enough to end up in those magazines and newspapers. When Rikidozan asked her if she minded marrying a man from North Korea, he was moved to tears of joy when she said she didn't mind at all. And Rikidozan did make a secret visit to South Korea on January 8th. The next morning, an unexpected article appeared in a Japanese newspaper. And this is from Seoul. Rikidozan, Japanese pro wrestler of Korean descent, is in Korea for a 1-week visit at the invitation of Education Minister Il Kyung Park of the Republic of the Korean military government. And unfortunately, what Rikidozan feared the most had risen to the surface. He was seriously concerned that his young fans would be disillusioned if they discovered the true identity of their national hero. Fortunately, there weren't many repercussions since most of the newspapers refrained from reporting his visit to South Korea, and he refused an interview with a newspaper that had disclosed his secret visit. And this is something that Rikidozan had mentioned or had displayed in the past, was an awareness of media coverage and having a good enough relationship with various media outlets to kind of control the flow of information and make sure that things that would hurt his promotion or hurt himself didn't get reported. And luckily, in this case, the media complied with his requests, where they kind of kept it on the down low, so to speak. And the official reason for his private visit was that some South Korean politicians offered to help him promote wrestling matches in Seoul in April of 1963. At that time, however, post-war reparations lay between Japan and South Korea. Politicians of both countries intended to use Rikidozan for their political purposes, and he must have been very careful not to get caught in the middle of this political maneuvering, because reparations needed to be paid. And I'm guessing it's from Japan to South Korea. Mm-hmm. So again, Rikidozan had to be delicate about what he was doing in Korea so that he didn't get wrapped up in a pawn in a game between the politicians in both countries. So out of all that, he went to Korea and did something.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be another match for a week. It would be on Friday, the 11th, and it's at the Riki Sports Palace. I should have mentioned the prior match a week before was in the Riki Sports Palace. So you can see we're running this tour on short money. It doesn't cost much. He already owns the facility. So he's not having to pay rent for this. There's a non-title match, best of 3 falls, 60-minute time limit for the NWA International Heavyweight and JWA All Asia Heavyweight titles. Rikidozan versus Baron von Hess, which he would win. Let's see, we have Toyonobori versus Jess Ortega in the semi-main. Those were the televised matches. And the interesting part about this show is that Rikidozan's plane from South Korea was 2 hours late, so he arrived at the arena just minutes before his match was to take place, which is kind of interesting because he does go for, well, about a 10-minute match. So he didn't spend a lot of time in the ring with Baron von Hess. So they got in and got out, kind of like one of the dusty matches when he was so popular.
I feel like that's where we're at with Rikidozan now. He knows he doesn't have to be a 60-minute man anymore. Not that he ever was, according to some of the guys that he worked 60 minutes with, like a Luthez, who said he came to realize we didn't need to go 60 minutes. And so I think Rikidozan's got his shtick down now.
And that's good enough. It's whatever the fans want. I mean, you trying to find out what your audience needs. And if your audience is big enough to make the money that you're happy with, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. Kind of like the Hogan formula that worked all over the country for so long. It worked, so why touch it? I mean, it got boring for some of us, but for a lot of people, it didn't. I guess that's what you just keep doing. We go to the 18th, another Friday. Guess where it is? Riki Sports Palace again. These are all 2,500, 3,000 people sellouts. Another tag match with Jess Ortega, Baron von Hess on the main. And we have Native versus Native in the semi-main, which we've been seeing a lot of. Kokichi Endo versus Mammoth Suzuki. And just looking at the card, I probably should have prefaced when we talked about 2 wrestlers that were going to be at this tour, like the outsiders, that's all that you got. That's all we have. Jess Ortega and Baron von Hess. I don't think there's another person here.
I believe Tony Marino comes in as the tour goes on. For those curious, Tony Marino would be fairly famous over here as Batman, not the Batman, but Batman with 2 T's. You could get away with those things back in the day. Yeah, he had a long tenured career, though, that Tony Marino worked well into the 1980s.
All right, hey, we have a match that isn't in Riki's Sports Plaza. It's on the 19th, 1963, and that is a house show out of Kanagawa, and that draws 9,000 people. Hey, it might be nice to get out of that tiny little arena and tiny little building and go to a more large arena. Mm-hmm. So they draw 9,000 there. A lot of Jesse Ortega. There's Tony Marino finally showing up. Executioners showing up in the semi-main and main events. So now we've actually got 3 or 4 gaijin that are wrestling on these tours. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we're getting back to the television tapings going all over the place here. This one actually is taped it's in Japan, but it's at the Toyohashi City Gymnasium. 8,000 people show up for this one. And we've got Mammoth Suzuki versus Mr. Brute. And that one I'm not familiar with exactly who Mr. Brute is. Main event, Rikidozan, Michiaki Yoshimura, Kokichi Endo versus Jess Ortega, Tony Marino, and the Executioner. So the gaijins are starting to multiply here where we're getting a few more involved compared to the very beginning of the tour.
Right.
We've actually got a title match for the first time in this tour other than the single. This is a tag title match on January 29th. In Osaka, in front of 12,000 people for the JWA All Asia Tag Team Championship match. This title is technically vacant. I'm not sure why. It's hard to tell with these tag titles, and the title history is foggy, even in Japan. You think it's weird in the States on some of the smaller promotions where the title would change hands in every town in the loop. It's not that much better in Japan. It is better, but not that much sometimes. Rikidozan and Michiaki Yoshimura defeat Jess Ortega and Tony Marino and the title remains vacant because the second fall, Rikidozan and Yoshimura win by DQ. And this match was televised. And Yoshimura was in the main event. He was subbing for Toyonobori, who was, quote, seriously injured. It wasn't common knowledge at the time that Toyonobori was not injured, but absorbed in gambling. He incurred a great deal of debt, and being unable to pay it back, he had gone into hiding. For whatever reason, Rikidozan was permissive with him. We've talked about that before.
Oh, that Toyonobori. You have to wonder, how much money did he owe to go into hiding as often as he did until his debts were paid off? Because it's not like, yeah, I know I owe you a couple grand. I mean, you'd think, go make your payday, wrestle the match, and then pay it off afterwards. But clearly, this guy was into some serious heavy gambling.
Yeah, he was in deep, and it was just, he was an inveterate gambler. It seems like he would gamble on anything. He would gamble on bicycle races, which at the time in Japan was popular. He would gamble on all kinds of sports to the point where, not dissimilar to Rikidozan, when he owed money to people, he would find a way to just not be around for it. If you recall, in the late 50s, he had money trouble as well. So he would find himself just not to be at certain shows because people were coming to the shows looking for Rikidozan. Luckily for him, Rikidozan was able to go to Hawaii for 4 months or 5 months out of the year to generate enough cash to come back, settle issues, and then make a bunch of other promises and take out a bunch of loans from other people to run his promotion.
You think Toyonobori was off hiding wherever Ricky was hiding? You think he gave him kind of an idea of where to go hide, if you will? I mean,
I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe he saw Toyonobori and was sympathetic towards him because they shared that. That's what I was, that's what I was thinking too when you were reading, the notes and whatnot, where it says for whatever reason Rikidozan was permissive with Toyonobori, and I have to think the only reason that would have to be he kind of sympathized or empathized with him to a degree. Yeah, and they were similar build, although I think Toyonobori was probably bigger. They were very stocky, former sumo guys. I don't know. I'm just, again, we're speculating, but
sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if Rikidozan didn't see something of himself in Toyonobori, and maybe that's why he took it easy on him when Toyonobori would pull all these crazy stunts.
And again, he was being put in a position to, I don't want to say thrive, but certainly he was given an opportunity to be one of the bigger stars here in the JWA, and he seems like he's shooting himself in his foot.
Yeah, because Yoshimura is taking his spot. Granted, at this point, they have enough star power at the top that Rikidozan could just book a 6-man back into a tag. And if that meant that Toyonobori couldn't make the show, it's not the end of the world. It's not like Rikidozan isn't making these shows, which did happen in the late 50s where he wasn't making the shows, and that did not work out at all. I think Rikidozan's able to compensate to some degree with some of his other main event level stars. But we'll see how long he puts up with Toyonobori pulling this. We're only in, where am I now? Just the beginning of February. So we've got another just over a month to finish this tour. We'll see when Toyonobori decides to come back.
I just found something fun on February 8th, but I'll wait till we get there.
Let's do it. February 8th, you're one day ahead of me. What do you want to talk about?
It's been a long time since we've discussed a fundraiser event for the relief.
Oh gosh, I knew it.
A snow disaster apparently here. So I just thought that was fun. I haven't seen the fundraiser in a long time.
Yeah, this is a fundraiser relief of the Hokuriku District snow disaster. Now it's being held at Riki Sports Palace. 3,000 people are there. So the event is paid for. You can run this. This is the cheapest show that Rikidozan's going to run because no one has to travel anywhere. They don't need any rent. So they could take a percentage of the proceeds of this house show and donate it. And it doesn't hurt them very much because they didn't have to pay rent and insurance for the performance like they would if they went to like Osaka or somewhere.
Right.
So you're right. Another fundraising show. It was based on where wrestling began with fundraising.
That's what I was going to say. For those who are late to the party, haven't listened to some of the earlier episodes, you couldn't have a wrestling show in Japan if it wasn't a fundraiser back in the day. I mean, it was a fundraiser for everything.
Yep, and maybe that was part of the promotion. kind of forcing their way into places maybe they weren't welcome, saying, "Hey, how can't you cover us? We're it's a charity show. We're helping out." And maybe the press was a little more sympathetic to covering it then, because it wasn't just gross pro wrestling that hadn't really caught on yet, and they could cover it with the idea that they're also covering the charity as well. We'll move to February 9th. This is in Tokyo, the Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium, in front of 10,000 people. We have an NWA International Heavyweight Championship match. Past 2 out of 3 falls, 61-minute time limit, with Oki Shikina as the referee. Rikidozan defeating Jesse Ortega 2 falls to 1 to retain the title. It would be his 15th defense. DQ in the first fall in almost 10 minutes. DQ second fall in almost 5. And then for the third fall, Rikidozan actually pins Ortega. And this show would air on Nippon TV, but it wouldn't air until March 8th, not till almost a month after the house show took place. And I was talking with Ray before the show started, saying that there are gaps in between tours where the weekly television show time slot's coming up. And what are you going to air? You can't air a live show. There are no shows. You're between tours. So what they would do, and they continue to do to this day, is they will tape a show at a house show and not air it on television until much later. In this case, 4 weeks later, they would air a show from February. February 9th wouldn't air till March 8th. And at least then you get to see a championship match. It's a little out of date, but he's retaining the title. There's no title change you need to catch up with. And this is just something that we deal with television coverage, because the weekly show doesn't always match up with a house show. We're back to the Riki Sports Palace on the 15th. We take a gap, and I'm just looking over. Nothing out of the ordinary. We're talking about Mr. Brute, Tony Marino, the Executioner, Jess Ortega, same folk, and the same top 3 or 4 guys. We're still waiting for the return of Toyonobori. The Executioner was unmasked in this show by Rikidozan, and it turned out to be Al Baffert, a.k.a. Andre Adori, and he was 56 years old at the time.
Wow.
And he had been wrestling at this point for 33 years. So he was old.
He was one of the originals. He was on one of those first tours here of Japan, if I remember correctly.
As Andre Ondori, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't the masked Executioner.
Well, he's now the unmasked Executioner.
Good point. That is true. We move into March, so this tour is almost ending, and I think we're going to finish everything up in the Riki Sports Palace. March 1st, he's there. Rikidozan versus Tony Marino. I think we're going to get some larger singles matches towards the end. We have on March 4th in Japan, in the Tokyo Taito Municipal Gymnasium in front of 10,000 people, another tag championship match for the vacant title, because it was the last match ended by DQ. Rikidozan and Yoshimura defeat Jesse Ortega and Tony Marino, but it's this time not through a DQ. It's a count out of ring for the final fall. So we still do not have tag champions. I don't want to, again, more speculation, because that's all we can do. I'm wondering if Rikidozan's waiting for Toyonobori to come out of hiding so that he can have the tag team champions that he really wants, which is him and Toyonobori. That's what I'm guessing. There are actually notes from that match. Oki Shikina, the referee, refused to award the title to Rikidozan and Yoshimura because they didn't take clean falls. Since they didn't take clean falls from Marino and Ortega because it was a count out of ring, he's not going to award the title. It's still held up. And the likely scenario was Rikidozan wanted to win the match, but since Yoshimura was just a substitute for the injured Toyonobori, look at that. I know history. He didn't want them to be recognized as tag champions. His plans were to win back the title with Toyonobori. Another likely scenario, this one regarding Toyonobori, is that he wasn't injured, but made himself scarce due to heavy gambling debts. So that part we knew. But I went through all of that just to speculate something that is in fact true, or at least speculated by another source, saying they really wanted to wait for Toyonobori to come back. And that's why they had something of a schmoz finish where the count out of ring isn't good enough to have a title change hands. In the history of Japanese wrestling, the title, I think, could change hands on a count out of ring. I know that they've given flat out wins to teams with a count out of ring. I just don't know if you can get the title by a count out of ring.
Well, it looks like Toyonobori returns March 15th. At least I see him here in Battle Royal.
Well, just in time. And this is only a 5-match show. It's strange because it only has 1,000 people in attendance. That's weird. Let me look at what the main events are. Toyonobori is defeating Baron von Hess with a half Boston Crab at 5 minutes. Toyonobori defeats Nagasawa with a backslide in 20 minutes to win a 9-man battle royal. So he comes back pretty strong in wrestling 2 straight matches. One match that ends in 5 minutes, 42 seconds, admittedly, but then he goes right into a battle royal. And that was with Toyonobori, Yoshimura, Endo, Suzuki, Oki, Inoki, Nagasawa, and a couple other guys. So that's how the tour ends on March 15th, and it ends up on TV, but only an attendance of 1,000, which seems strange to me. I wonder if there were extenuating circumstances for such a low draw.
Right.
I know Rikidozan's not there, but still, I'd like to think you could draw more than 1,000 with everything else going on and the returning Toyonobori.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen them draw as low as 1,000, so maybe there was a little more to it. But yeah, Toyonobori comes back with a vengeance here, not only scoring a win in a singles match, but like you said, he turns around the very next match and defeats 8 people, or outlasts 8 people anyway, in a 9-man battle royal to close the show there. So, and that aired on TV, so that was a fun spectacle for all there on March 15th.
Yep, and just so everyone's aware, battle royals in Japan are different than battle royals in America. Getting thrown over the ropes doesn't mean anything in Japan. You actually somehow have to pin dudes in order to, quote, eliminate them from the battle royal. So in the midst of all these people running around and fighting, the referee's got to watch for people attempting to pin other people. And some of the funny parts of a battle royal is that when somebody's getting pinned, a bunch of the other wrestlers will jump on top of the wrestler trying to pin. It's interesting to watch. It's a totally different format than what we're familiar with in the States for a battle royal.
Dog pile pins over there in Japan.
Dog pile, thank you. That's the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the 15th. We had TV that night. And then we move on to newsworthy information on the 17th of March. Giant Baba, or Showy Baba at the time, comes back to Tokyo and holds a press conference at Haneda Airport. He said he fought 502 bouts, lost only 6 or 7 during his 20-month stay in America and Canada. Prior to his return, he spent 2 months wrestling in Southern California and met the Destroyer for his WWA World title twice in Los Angeles in February and once in San Diego in March. Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, talked about Baba in an interview by Scott Teal, and one of Scott Teal's Whatever Happened To issues. He had a magazine out back in I want to say the 90s and 2000s. What made Baba in Japan was wrestling me in Los Angeles. Oh, ever the humble Destroyer. It was handled by the great Togo. Oh, always the honest Togo, who was the interpreter and booker for the American wrestlers. The first night I'm wrestling Baba, I don't know him from a bag of tomatoes, but it was my biggest payoffs up to that time. I got 8% of the house show in Los Angeles. Jules Strongbow, who was the promoter, I believe, at the time.
Yes, he was.
Comes in and says, this place is sold out, $22,000 house. We have to do something to bring this back. Ringside is 5 rows of Japanese. There's 8 Japanese photographers here to watch this match. What are we going to do? Dick Beyer says, we're going to make that big Jap look like $1 million. You let me handle it. I went out, made it look good enough, and we brought it back for 2 more matches. Baba never won the title, but when he went back to Japan, he had all this publicity about wrestling me. He was bigger than Rikidozan. Again, possibly overstating it, but
just a little. However, you got to think about, Dick Beyer's time with Baba, in All Japan and whatnot. So they were kind of chummy. So I guess I could see him trying to put over Baba to that degree, and of course himself in the interim.
Mm-hmm. I think out of all of that, probably the best message out of it was the Destroyer realized that Baba needed to get put over strong, especially since there was a large Japanese contingent in Los Angeles at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you're catering to a hometown. It's kind of like the Italians in Bruno Sammartino or the Puerto Ricans and Pedro Morales. So if you have a local contingent of a certain ethnicity, you'd be crazy not to cater to them by giving each one of the ethnicities their own hero. And Baba served as that hero in LA for those matches with the Destroyer.
Oh, we got some fun stuff coming here in the next line.
Yes, we do. In his book, Mass Decisions, Beyer revealed the fact that he was paid about $4,500 for the series, while Baba only received $75 due to Togo's excessive exploitations as intermediator, which I believe is three big words that could also be condensed to thief, where he's just skimming. That's not skimming.
That's not even skimming, Dan. That's just stealing,
that's
man.
That's raping
he's and pillaging.
Right off.
Yeah, oh my
barely
God.
Giving this guy enough for food. $4,500 in 1963, I believe, would be the equivalent of almost $45,000 now. For the series of 3 matches. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, to say the least.
Baba's being put over very, very strong right before he returns to Japan. You'd have to be crazy not to think that Rikidozan wasn't in contact with somebody through the Great Togo or whoever saying, this guy needs to be strong on his way back. That's why we sent him out for an American excursion, to get seasoned and to be elevated, because I'm going to push him to the moon when he gets back to the promotion. So I'm sure Rikidozan was aware of the success of Giant Baba and probably instrumental in it. Rikidozan did go to Los Angeles and made an arrangement with the Destroyer to visit Japan in May. Rikidozan accompanied Baba on his trip back to Japan. Shocking. At Haneda Airport, he said he had won 2 straight falls over Buddy Rogers in St. Louis on March 12th. We believe he told such a palpable lie to the media to make Rogers appear weak and unworthy of an invitation to wrestle in Japan. So I believe we had talked about that before. I'm not sure if we did, that Rikidozan was trying to negotiate a match with Buddy Rogers in Japan, and for whatever reason, whether it was money or something else, maybe Rikidozan was trying to get a title out of it.
Right.
It wasn't going to go the way Rikidozan wanted.
Yeah, that was kind of the reason we talked about that when you were talking about before, where Rikidozan was trying to bring in all the different world champions over there, and he winds up bringing in the WWA instead of like the NWA or any of the other ones, because that was who he could, strike a deal with. And Buddy Rogers seemed to be one of the guys that they were certainly having issues with trying to get to come to Japan. So, hey, let's tell the story our way. So basically they're burying Buddy here. He didn't just do a job, but he did a job 2 straight falls, they have to point out here in St. Louis. So obviously they're not going to be doing any business with Buddy Rogers, the Nature Boy, anytime soon.
Yeah, that's a fair bet.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnetty. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering mini past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
So at the end of that tour, which ended in the middle of March, we take an entire week off and we move straight to the 5th World League. Now, this one's slightly different. This one is going to be in support of the Tokyo Olympics. The Tokyo Olympics will be coming up in 1964, and it is said that Rikidozan did donate quite a bit of money to help support getting set up for the Olympics. He must have seen that as a huge promotional tool and opportunity for Rikidozan, because the entire world is coming to Japan next year for the Olympics. And with Rikidozan's notoriety in Japan, there's no way he is going to miss out on this opportunity for free press. So let's see who we have in the 5th World League for outsiders. 9 strong wrestlers were invited: Killer Kowalski, Pat O'Connor, Haystacks Calhoun, Gino Marella, later known as Gorilla Monsoon, Fred Atkins, Bob Ellis, Cowboy Bob Ellis.
That's right.
Sandor Szabo, Killer X, who I will not reveal until later because he'll probably be unmasked at some point during this tour, and the great Togo. I thought they said 9 strong wrestlers. We have 8 strong wrestlers and the great Togo, who is a rich wrestler, but I'm not sure how strong he is.
That's a who's who, man, of talent coming in. Boy, it gets bigger and bigger every year. And this time, that was 51 shows here as part of the World League. That's a lot of events to be had. And look at the names involved, though, from Kowalski to Haystacks Calhoun, Pat O'Connor to Gorilla Monsoon. Would have loved to have seen a few. Sandor Szabo was huge in his day. Fred Atkins. So Cowboy Bob Ellis. I mean, it really is just a list of just top talent.
Yeah. And this point, in 1963, Cowboy Bob Ellis is an enormous star. I believe he rocketed to stardom in the mid 50s, maybe late 50s, but he was the guy in a large portion of the country. He was money no matter where he went, and that lasted for a long time. So this is star-studded without a doubt. I will note, for the purposes of wrestling history, Bruno Sammartino would enter the New York area in early 1963, and on May 17th, which is at the very end of this Fifth World League tour, at Madison Square Garden, he would defeat Buddy Rogers in 48 seconds to become the second WWF World Heavyweight Champion. That is quite a historic moment on May 17th. There will be more going on May 17th when we go through the Fifth World League, but I wanted to make sure you're aware of that at least, or remind everybody who doesn't know the day and the time and how many seconds it took Bruno to beat him and Buddy Rogers.
Well, Buddy's just having a bad year altogether, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, he can't work out a deal. He's very controlling. Boy, that guy. Has anyone written a book about him and how he used to run around with his posse? And
yeah, there was a book not too long ago that came out.
Promotions?
Oh, yeah. Buddy was notorious for doing that. He would just jump from territory to territory and bring his crew, his entourage with him of wrestlers, and everybody else had to leave the territory they were taking over. He even had his own undercard guys. I mean, Buddy knew what he was doing. I mean, if you look at it from his standpoint anyway.
Yeah, his strategies and techniques, the things that he did were revolutionary at the time and would be repeated from multiple wrestlers all along the way, where they bring in their own guys, they hold people up for cash. They try to, when they come in with their own guys, those guys try to make an effort to quash the up-and-comers that are already in the promotion that Buddy Rogers comes into. It's nasty, but the business is nasty, I guess.
Yeah, no doubt about it, man. Looking at all the talent involved in this tournament, I mean, it's a much with 50 shows or 51 shows, if you will. There's just so much talent here involved in the tournament, and you just look at the names. I mean, both sides, not just the Gaijin, but the local talent involved here. And I'm just scrolling through, and it's amazing to see. He goes light. Rikidozan goes light every fall into the winter. Like you said, he keeps a couple of big names around just so he has somebody foreign on the cards. But in general, very light. He stayed home a lot, it seemed like, over this last winter with some of those results you were just looking at in that tour. But boy, he goes balls out, all out when it comes to the World League. And every year it just gets bigger and bigger. And wow, this is a big one.
Yeah, 51 house shows. This guy has lost his marbles. He just says, well, if they loved it last time in the last 4 years, I'm just going to keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger until they stop coming. So there's There's a show on March 22nd that is titled The Eve of the Fifth World Annual World League. So it's before the proper tournament starts, but it's more of like a showcase. It's at Riki Sports Palace, so of course it's going to have 3,000 people. Imagine going to this tiny little 3,000-seat arena, and you're going to see matches. And granted, they're called exhibition matches, but it's really just a showcase of the outrageous talent that's going to be on this tour.
Right. The
final, how many is it? 6 matches of the tour. Kokichi Endo wrestling Sandor Szabo. Antonio Inoki wrestling Killer X. Oki versus Gino Marella, Baba versus Killer Kowalski. And these are all no decisions, shockingly, in the 5 minutes. So like a bunch of 5-minute draws. But imagine that. Michiaki Yoshimura versus Bob Ellis. Toyonobori versus Pat O'Connor. Any of these would be, I feel like Gino Marella now. Any of these would be a main event across the country.
Yeah,
these are major
literally
matches.
Be hanging from the rafters to come to these events.
Yeah, this is like a drug dealer giving you your first dose for free. Look at all this as a appetizer saying, look what you can see. Look at what the talent that you can see if you buy tickets to one of our house shows.
Not only that, I'm looking at the match prior to the exhibition match. It's a handicap match here on the eve, the pre-show, if you will, the warm-up show for the big World League. Haystacks Calhoun defeating not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 men in a handicap match. Talk about overkill. Haystacks going over in 6 minutes time there.
Oh, that's right. And that was televised. That was part of the show. Suzuki, Nagasawa, Mitsuaki Hirai, Kumagoro Okuma, and Katsurahama Yonataru. And Haystacks Calhoun beats all of them. So that is a spectacle in and of itself. So that every major outsider they got to showcase on this television episode that would lead into the tournament itself. At this point, which is March 22nd, 1963, 4 months later, Gino Marella will officially change his name to Gorilla Monsoon.
Gotta love it.
Well, with 51 shows, even with all the guys involved, it's just going to take forever to go through these matches.
Right.
And they have plenty of time. Yeah. I can't even imagine having data or information.
Well,
it's too bad in 1963, you'd think we would tape a bunch of this stuff, but a lot of it wasn't taped.
One thing I will say, Dan, in regards to the layout of the shows, much like we've seen in prior years, we get the World League matches on the events and some undercard matches as well, but we're closing out the night with tag team and 6-man tag team matches with the some of the talent that aren't in the tournament on that night. So, for instance, and I'm just scrolling along, so I'm randomly on April 8th here, fun main event winds up being a tag team match. Rikidozan, Yoshimura, and the Great Togo defeating Pat O'Connor, Gino Marella, and Fred Atkins. So we've seen that before in the past in regards to how they would finish up the shows with the big tag matches.
That is true. And it's also kind of a sorbet to cleanse the palate, because with some of these shows, you've seen 3 or 4 singles matches that are tournament related, and you can get too much of a good thing. And if your main event isn't one of the tournament matches, then how are you going to have a singles match that's, quote, more important than the tournament matches? It's almost like you're honor bound to have a tag match of some kind as your final match, unless it's going to be a tournament match that's your final. So there's 2 ways to look at this tournament. 51 shows, it's 1 million shows. But what do the fans see? Unless you can go to all 51 of these, the vast majority of the fans that are following pro wrestling are doing it from the television. So maybe we should take a focus on what people are actually seeing on the TV screen. We'll move to the April 5th taping. You're going to see Haystacks Calhoun versus Sandor Szabo, Toyonobori versus Pat O'Connor, and a tag match for the main event. Rikidozan and Giant Baba in the main event of a TV episode versus Killer Kowalski and Killer X. So that's what the fans are seeing on TV as this tournament crawls along. And before the tournament matches start, we've got, 12 of your local wrestlers fighting each other, and it's always the same undercard guys. We'll move forward. I'm not seeing any title matches, so they're not trying to take any of the shine away from the tournament matches. They are the focus of this tour.
Right.
I'm seeing 7,000, 8,000 people in this show, 8,000 here, 6,000 there, 7,000. I'm not seeing the 12,000s, but I'm also not seeing them go to some of those arenas yet. These are smaller shows, but there's 51 of them. There's plenty of time. So with this many shows on a tour, you can really go everywhere in Japan. You've got enough time to cover the entire territory. But they're drawing good money. Kobe in Japan, they're drawing 10,000, a lot of 8,000s. There's a lot of 10,000s or 11,000s too, right in the beginning of the tour. So I'm going to keep an eye on what our attendance is looking like. Let's move to the next TV episode to see if something exciting happens on TV here. April 12th, more of the same. Fred Atkins versus Haystacks Calhoun. Baba versus Pat O'Connor. So now you have Baba versus an NWA champion. And the 6-man tag is your main event. Rikidozan, Yoshimura, and the Great Togo. I thought the Great Togo was supposed to be the outsider. Versus Kowalski, Gino Marella, and Killer X. We have a problem at the end of the April 14th show in Okinawa. Haystacks Calhoun could not leave the Kagoshima airport for Miyakojima Island because of the load limit of the propeller-driven passenger aircraft, which is 4 words that means plane. So Haystacks Calhoun could not get on the plane to go to Miyakojima Island. Rikidozan had a 3-day run in Okinawa, which was administered by the United States at the time in order to obtain U.S. currency to be paid to American wrestlers. Okay. So maybe he had agreed to pay the wrestlers in American money. So he spent 3 days in Okinawa where he could transfer yen to dollars, I'm guessing. It's a little cryptic here. We move forward. The April 16th show would be taped for television, which is nice. This is another one. We have seen this show before. It's in Okinawa, the vacant lot at the rear of the Naha bus terminal. I swear we've been here before. In Asahibashi.
Yeah, we've been to that bus terminal.
Yeah, another bus terminal, 15,000 people. Isn't that crazy? 15,000. And they would have multiple shows. This is the 3-day run in Okinawa. This one says 15 or 20,000 full house. How do you have a full house in a parking lot? But regardless, the last show only drew 10,000. So gosh darn it, they were only able to draw 50,000 people over three nights in the same parking lot. And the final show of the 3-night run, the main event was for the NWA International Heavyweight Championship. And it would be Rikidozan versus Haystacks Calhoun, which Rikidozan would win. Calhoun pinned Rikidozan on the first fall. Rikidozan pinned Calhoun in the second. And then Rikidozan would beat Calhoun by count out of ring for the third fall. So Rikidozan going over Haystacks Calhoun.
There is a Rikidozan Haystacks match out there in clip form. And I would have to imagine it might be this one because off the top of my head, I don't know the date, but we know Rikidozan is not going to be around a whole lot longer to be wrestling Haystacks again.
That is true. All right. So on TV for the April 19th, it was from the April 16th show. So the first show of the tour, Mammoth Suzuki versus Haystacks Calhoun, Baba versus Gino Marella, and a 6-man tag for your main event, which is similar to what we've been seeing before. So we'll keep moving through. At the end of the April 21st show, I have a note that Yukio Mammoth Suzuki was demoted to Gorilla Suzuki by Rikidozan, who wasn't satisfied with Suzuki's performance. That name change was an insult directed at Suzuki, the image of a gorilla being inferior to that of a mammoth.
Somebody tell that to Gino, huh? But
yeah,
I mean,
interesting that less than 3 months later, Gorilla would pick up the name.
That's hilarious, though. You know, Mammoth Suzuki's been around for a bit here. And Rikidozan's not really happy with his performance. He's not really coming along like he wanted him to. You don't deserve the name Mammoth. So instead, I'm going to name you Gorilla. He's demoting him based on his name. So it's almost like demoting Terry Taylor to the Red Rooster, so to speak, right?
Yeah, in a way, he's trying to make his name seem less meaningful, ostensibly as a motivational tool to get him to improve his performance to earn the moniker of Mammoth Suzuki. Let's move on through. Osaka, 10,000 people, 7,000 people. We're drawing big money for this. Osaka, again, 12,000 people. Now, this one has a main event with Rikidozan defeating Pat O'Connor 2 falls to 1 for his NWA International Heavyweight match.
April 24th.
Yeah, April 24th.
So it's, what is that? Rikidozan over Pat O'Connor, 2 out of 3 falls. Wow. Beating NWA World Champions now.
Yeah, either future champions or high enough in the pecking order that they're world championship caliber. And then almost all the guys that came in for this tour are. Killer Kowalski was an unbelievable superstar. Bob Ellis is the same way. So any win over any of the guys you brought in is going to matter, at least in terms of the booking of them. It's going to elevate your position.
And he knew what he was doing. This is the only title match I've seen on this entire tour up until now. And he's in the ring with the former NWA World Champion. And he's scoring pinfalls over O'Connor, I should mention, too. All 3 falls end in a pinfall. So Rikidozan scoring not 1, but 2 pinfalls over the former NWA World Champ.
Moving forward, I'm in May 3rd now, and that was a live broadcast. Rikidozan versus Killer X. And this was a non-title match, but he would defeat Killer X 2 falls to 1. X pins Rikidozan in only a couple minutes. Rikidozan defeats X by countout at 8 minutes. And the third fall, Rikidozan defeats X at 55 seconds because Oki Shikina, the referee, stopped the match because Killer X lost consciousness. So basically, it sounds like Killer X could not answer the bell for the third fall.
So if we can go back real quick to April 30th, Dan, the main event, there's a tag team match here. Killer Kowalski and Fred Atkins scoring a victory over Rikidozan and the Giant Baba. But what's interesting is the results of the matchup. And we're near Baba's hometown, it would seem here, according to the notes. And so Atkins scores a win over Baba in the first fall. Baba gets a win back over Kowalski in the second fall. But the third fall is what's most interesting to me. Kowalski submitting Rikidozan with a quote-unquote toe hold. So Rikidozan seemingly doing the job in the final fall, kind of to let Baba save face, kind of doing a job for Baba to kind of keep him over with the hometown fans. So I thought that was kind of cool of Rikidozan.
Yeah, a submission from Rikidozan is not something you're going to see every day. And I don't believe this show was taped for TV. Might have made it a little more palatable for Rikidozan, but when you think about it, he's already like 30 shows into this tour and is making mountains of money off of it. So to kind of cater to his big prospect who just came back from a 2-year run in the States, ready for a huge push in the promotion, he's the guy that Rikidozan probably would do the honors for, or, put Baba over in a big way as having him not take the final fall here.
Well, we know Killer X has been unmasked. We haven't gotten to Mr. Zero yet, but he's around the corner. Hopefully we get to him this week. I love that. I wish they could bring back a team of Mr. Zero and Mr. Atomic. We need to do that. Somebody book it.
It's ridiculous. All right, so we got through May 3rd. Rikidozan and Killer X, and that's the main event. It's a non-title match, but he does defeat Killer X in not a lot of time, about 11 minutes. But at the end, Killer X does unmask himself, and he reveals his identity to be Frank Farmer Boy Townsend, who I don't really know much about, but that's okay. Tour continues. I'm still seeing Inoki on the 6th or 7th matches of these shows, so no one's forgotten about Inoki. He does get a win over Kokichi Endo. I did want to note on May 5th in Sapporo in front of 8,000 people. Of course, not filmed for TV. But in the 7th, right before you get to the main events, there's really 3 main events on every show on these tours because there's so much talent. Right before all that starts, single fall, 30-minute time limit. Antonio Inoki defeats Kokichi Endo by a DQ in 7 minutes. That's a big deal because Kokichi Endo is right up there. He's part of that upper echelon of guys. So for Antonio Inoki to get any kind of win over any of these guys is a big deal, and it's showing that the promotion is still backing him as one of the major players in the future. We move to the 6th, and we have a title match in front of 8,000 people in Sapporo City in the sports center there for the JWA All-Asia Tag Team Championship match. His title is still vacant, but I have a good feeling about this one because we got Rikidozan and Toyonobori now defeating Killer Kowalski and Fred Atkins to become the new champions. So as speculated, now that Toyonobori is finally back, Rikidozan's ready to put the titles on them, the tag titles on them.
Presumably, debts have been paid. So Toyonobori's back. And we've seen him back for a bit, but yeah, it's like you said before, they were waiting for him to get back to make the title change or crown the champions, if you will. And so it makes sense. Toyonobori's back now. Rikidozan and he are the new All Asia Tag Team Champions.
Yep, and they even give Toyonobori the first fall, pinning Atkins in 12 minutes. Kowalski would then pin Toyonobori 3.5 minutes after that. Rikidozan finishes them off by pinning Atkins in 1 minute for the third fall, but at least Toyonobori does get one of the pins there. And now the super team, the superpowers of Rikidozan and Toyonobori are formed. Oh, yeah!
I like it.
And everything's right in the world, at least in Japan now, because they've got the tag titles on who they want them to be on, and Rikidozan's already got the NWA International, All Asia, and probably 3 other singles belts.
I love the semi-main on this show. You were looking at this title match, May the 6th as well. Gorilla Monsoon, or Gino, at this point, taking on the Giant Baba. But what I get a kick out of the most is the times of each of the falls. They go 3 falls. Marella scores the win over Baba. First fall, 36 seconds. Baba turns around and submits Gino in 10.5 minutes. And then finally, the 4 minutes, the DQ. Baba going to go 2 falls over on Gorilla Monsoon. And it just makes me chuckle because I go fast forward to the 80s and the Machines. You remember the Machines, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Big and Super. I'm not talking about Giant Machine. And Gorilla Monsoon on an episode of Primetime trying to speculate as to who could be under those masks. And he mentions there's one guy that it could be the Giant Baba. And I just have to scratch my, come on, Gorilla. You've seen Baba. There's no Baba under those hoods.
Oh, boy. No, definitely not. Another interesting thing, that second fall where Baba submits Marella, Baba did it by stomping and kicking Morella's hand and forearm many times.
Smashing him down. Wow. Yeah, I didn't even catch that. Good catch.
Marella did steamroll Baba in the first fall 36 seconds. So you're looking at a guy who weighs more than Baba, might not be as tall as Baba, but is definitely a lot stronger. And this is Baba after only 3 years. So not even 3 years in the ring. So he's still a relatively new guy, even though he's getting pushed to the top. No one's pretending that he's going to be going over all 9 of these outsiders that came for the World League. Taking a fall to Marella is no big deal because he does win the match by DQ at the end. May 10th, Baba versus Haystacks Calhoun. Interesting.
Wow,
Great Togo. How's he end up on TV? Versus Killer Kowalski and Rikidozan non-title match against Fred Atkins. So 3 singles matches for that TV episode, and that was in front of 5,000 people, full house in Iwate Prefecture. I'm on the 17th now, where we are at the end. 17th at Tokyo Prefecture Metropolitan Gymnasium. That would be in front of 10,000 people. In fact, the prior show was in Yokohama, and that was in front of 10,000 people. So we're right up at the end of the tournament now and getting ready for the final. Because it's the final, we already know Rikidozan is going to face the guy who made it through the tournament with the most points. You've got a lot of singles matches for this final show that are of some interest. You got Kentaro Oki defeating Kokichi Endo, Yoshimura defeating Gino Marella, Baba beating Haystacks Calhoun. And then before the final, which would be a singles match, they have a 45-minute best 2 out of 3 falls tag match with Toyonobori and Great Togo defeating Fred Atkins and Frank Townsend. So now you've got a tag match separating a bunch of singles matches, which would then lead to the final for the 5th annual World League, 2 out of 3 falls, no time limit. Oki Shikin, the referee, Mitsuhiro Rikidozan, would defeat Killer Kowalski 2 falls to 1 to win the tournament. Kowalski will get the first fall by pinning Rikidozan in 5 minutes. Rikidozan would defeat Kowalski via countout in 7 minutes for the second fall, but would submit Kowalski with a half Boston Crab in 5 minutes 50 seconds to take the match 2 falls to 1 and win the 5th annual World League.
Wow,
and that
5 World Leagues in a row, but something tells me that's going to change next year. I don't see Rikidozan winning this thing again, Dan. But for now,
you know what?
He is the bull of the woods, baby, if you will.
Yeah, all streaks have to end. I will say that before this main event begins with Rikidozan versus Killer Kowalski, the intelligent, sensational destroyer appeared in the ring to publicize his first match, which would be held 2 nights later. And he did something completely unexpected. Dick Beyer told about this incident in that Scott Teal interview that we had referenced earlier. Quote, I got right in front of Kowalski and he says, don't shake my hand, just look at me. He's standing there staring at me. Kowalski now says, slap me as hard as you can. So I slapped him. It was instant shock to the people because Kowalski was a big star over there. And another interview, Beyer says, to this day, people in Japan come up to me and say, I remember when you slapped Kowalski.
Wow. That was a wrestler in Kowalski that knew how to make some money and draw heat. And that was pretty damn cool. You know, the story there, Beyer comes up to him. He's just looking to shake hands. And he's like, no, slap me. And then, you know, and he, like he says, it was years later. People still come. I remember when you slapped Kowalski. So that was like a big deal. It was like Dr. D slapping John Stossel, maybe. I don't know.
Yep. And think about it. This is before the main event. So the entire tournament had already gone through. Killer Kowalski did not lose a single match in the entire tournament. He had 12 wins, 0 losses, and 0 draws. It does appear that we don't have results for him against Pat O'Connor or Antonio Inoki during this tour. But every one of these tournaments, especially these crazy ones with a million results, it's hard to determine if they actually actually happen.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, if he actually worked Inoki, I think that was a no-brainer. Kowalski would have the W there. I don't know what they would have done with O'Connor. But, that's another thing. We talked about the insanely detailed show notes. And if you guys want to see the tournament, the wins, the losses, the draws, all played out in the chart, the tournament chart, it's right there in the notes Dan put together over there at patreon.com/WrestleCopia, part of that VIP superfan tier, along with all of our great video casts, Dan, that we've been doing. We've got more of those coming.
Yeah, and something about these insanely detailed show notes that are shared over there. If you get a chance to look over them and you follow along with some of the results that we're covering, if any questions come up or something strange or out of the ordinary, is noticed when you're looking over these notes and you don't remember us covering it, feel free to get a hold of us and say, hey, do you have something to say about this, or did you notice that? There's always an opportunity for us to learn. Maybe we're missing something that's obvious, but research is for everybody. The hardest part is finding the data. Once it's out there, I want to share it to the world. I want everyone to enjoy and immerse themselves in Japanese pro wrestling as deeply as they want to go.
Right.
So being able to look at these notes, you can glean a lot of information. We've got the entire bracket for the tournament. And one of the interesting things I see is Pat O'Connor appears to have only competed in 7 matches during this tournament. And I don't know if he was sick or injured, but he won all 7 matches he was in, but it didn't qualify him for the finals. Killer Kowalski won all 12. He had 12 points. Haystacks Calhoun would win 10, lose 2, and get a draw. So he was in second place. He almost went to the finals against Rikidozan. After that, everybody else kind of dropped off. There were several guys with 0 points, including Antonio Inoki, Kentaro Oki, Mammoth Suzuki, which would later be degraded to Gorilla Suzuki,
right,
and Kokichi Endo, all with 0 points. So Inoki and Oki can't be too upset because Kokichi Endo, the number 1 guy for Rikidozan, got 0 points.
No, this is all about putting over the gaijin here. You can, if you guys, you know, like I said, if you guys can get a hold of these show notes, you'll see that with the chart Dan posted in here, you can see that they brought these guys over to put them over, with Kowalski in first place, Haystacks in second, Gino Marella in third, Pat O'Connor in fourth. You can definitely see all of the local talent near the bottom here. And obviously, like we just discussed, it was Kowalski who wound up winning undefeated, it would appear, in the tournament. So naturally, that creates a giant foe for Rikidozan, someone that could possibly be unbeatable, right? So it's just a big spectacle there. It puts even more emphasis on the match because Kowalski's not just walking in the winner of the tournament, he's walking in undefeated.
Exactly. So you're putting over Kowalski over everybody else. In spite of him not having a match with O'Connor, a lot of the guys didn't have a match with O'Connor. Amongst the locals, they did make an effort to push Toyonobori, who had 5 wins and 2 losses. Yoshimura had 4 wins and 3 losses. And Baba would have 4 wins, 2 losses, but he would have a draw as well. He drew against Gino Marella and defeated Atkins, Killer X, Bob Ellis, and Sandor Szabo. So he had 4.5 points. So there were a few local wrestlers that were being pushed in this tournament, but everybody else was just going to take the L in order to move the tournament along. Anyway, it's all in the notes. Feel free to check them out. Following the 5th World League, there was supposed to be a World Championship Series inviting the WWA champion, but he didn't come. Rikidozan was supposed to challenge the world champion, which at the time was the Destroyer, but the Destroyer had lost the title to Fred Blassie in Los Angeles before he came to Japan. Oopsies. I'm not sure why that would happen, because that doesn't help Rikidozan very much.
No, I would think that he would be privy to any title changes in a deal that he struck, so kind of interesting there.
So maybe he just didn't want to give up the physical belt, because this is something that you get to do in the olden times when news didn't travel nearly as fast. They did, in fact, did have a, quote, world championship match in Japan. Unlike today, it was a time when information from overseas was hard to spread. Almost no Japanese people knew that the Destroyer had lost his title to Fred Blassie. If it were today, Destroyer would have suddenly challenged Rikidozan for the international championship, because everyone would already have known that Destroyer did not have the WWA title. In this case, news hadn't traveled that fast. So for all they knew, the Destroyer still had the WWA title, so they were going to play it like he did have the title. At the Nagoya tournament on May 21st, powerful tag team of the Destroyer and Killer Kowalski were scheduled to challenge Rikidozan and Toyonobori for the tag championships, but a falling out occurred between the two, and Kowalski's partner was changed to Fred Atkins. Well, I mean, I'm not surprised they had a falling out, because the Destroyer slapped Killer Kowalski a week before.
Yeah. This
team would lose to the current championships on May 6th. All right, so we don't have a lot of time off from the end of the tournament on the 17th. We go 2 days later to Osaka City in front of 12,000 people. We'll go right to the main event. The Destroyer defeats the NWA International and JWA All Asia Heavyweight Champion Rikidozan 2 falls to 1. He defeats him. Rikidozan pins the Destroyer in 9 minutes. Destroyer defeats Rikidozan via countout in 7 minutes. And then the Destroyer submits Rikidozan with a figure 4 leg lock in less than a minute for the third and final fall. And he defeats him in a non-title match. And this was the first and only time in Rikidozan's career that he lost clean by in a singles match in Japan by the figure 4 leg lock from Destroyer. And it's already May of 1963, so he's been wrestling almost 10 years, but it's the only time in his career that he lost by a clean decision in a singles match.
And basically, the Destroyer's career was made over in Japan after that. I mean, putting Rikidozan down clean in a singles match by submission with his patented figure 4 hold. And it's kind of peculiar how he becomes a babyface over there. Like, he's accepted by the Japanese fans over, you know, we've talked about his TV show. In fact, on the latest Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop, he talks about being over there in Japan while the Destroyer had his variety show and watching him on TV over there. So Destroyer was one of the very few gaijin that we would see on the babyface side of things and kind of be the corner man for Baba and Jumbo and whatnot moving forward into All Japan. And so, but it all starts here on his first trip. I believe this is his first trip to Japan, and going over on Rikidozan. Wow.
Not that this is particularly noteworthy, but that was May 19th. On May 20th, the wrestlers were off and enjoyed sightseeing. Just in case you were wondering, and I know you always do, saying, hey, wait a minute, there's a gap of 1 or 2 days between these two house shows. Gosh, I wonder what all the wrestlers did. Now you know, they enjoyed sightseeing on May 20th.
Stop and smell the roses.
Yep.
Or whatever flowers they have over there.
Oh, they got all kinds. So they have the cherry blossoms and there's festivals for all this stuff.
Sure.
I've never been. I think we had mentioned this in a prior podcast. A good friend of mine has been to Japan several times to see wrestling. And every time he was getting ready to go, I either didn't have time off from work, but I had money to go, or I had time off, but I didn't have the money to go. So I always missed out. And I feel badly about it because I think I would have put myself into hock buying merch over there and magazines and stuff.
You would have to figure out a new way to get you back to the States.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. May 21st. This is in Nagoya. 8,000 people packed to capacity. We've got an All Asia Tag Team Championship match. We already know the champs are Rikidozan and Toyonobori. They would beat the team of Killer Kowalski and Fred Atkins 2 falls to 1. And I think that is related to the note that we had here about, there it is, on May 21st, about them fighting, and we never got the Destroyer and Killer Kowalski to actually team up, so that's why Fred Atkins stood in. May 22nd, nothing of note. 8,000 people for a show of nothing of note. That's how hot Japan wrestling was at this time. We're telling you nothing about the house show. 8,000 people thought it was important enough to go to it. May 24th, this is a big show here. It's in the Tokyo Metropolitan Gymnasium in front of 12,000 people. The semi-main would be Toyonobori versus Killer Kowalski, wrestling to a draw. But in the main event, and get this, there's a lot of words here leading up to it, WWA World Heavyweight Championship match. People still didn't realize that the Destroyer never had already lost it. It's also a Texas death match. 1 fall, no time limit. Referee was Fred Atkins. So he was overseeing the Texas death match to make sure that the rules of a Texas death match, them being what they are, were upheld. The Destroyer wrestled the NWA International Heavyweight and JWA All Asia Heavyweight Champion Rikidozan to a draw at 28 minutes 15 seconds when the referee stopped the match.
What kind of AEW booking is this? You have a Texas death match going to a draw. Is that even possible?
No. No, it's not.
Well, apparently it is. Back in 1963 Japan, they need another referee. Let's oust Atkins. Let's do this again.
Yeah, well, Fred Atkins, I guess, was going to try to explain to them how Texas death matches work. We would learn not too long later, once the Funks got involved, you're more likely to see some Texas death matches that would go the normal way. These matches were broadcast. The Toyonobori versus Kowalski and Destroyer versus Rikidozan matches were on TV. They extended the broadcast by 15 minutes, And we have notes from somebody who was at the show. They said the gymnasium was filled to overflowing with an audience of 12,000. The match was televised live and achieved an extremely high audience rating of 64%, the fourth highest in Japanese TV history.
Wow.
That rating is somewhat misleading when compared to other higher ratings, since almost every home in Japan had a television set by this time. In October 7th, 1957, that Thez Rikidozan match, which drew an 87% rating, not that many homes had TVs, and there weren't as many programs to watch either. So with fewer stations, fewer TVs, fewer options, the fact that it got an 87 rating is awesome, but I don't think it compares to the 64% rating that would be drawn by this match 6 years later. I just think it's a lot more eyes on the product.
I mean,
because there's a lot
do the
more
math.
TV.
That's 2 out of every 3 households, really.
Yes. And so many, since almost every household had a TV by the 60s, that's a lot of people. Let's see. Before the One Fall No Time Limit main event began, an explanation was given to the audience that the Destroyer would not bring his title belt to the ring because the WWA had not yet sent it to Tokyo.
Sure, that's why.
Of course not. The match had become a rough and tumble one, with Rikidozan accidentally breaking 2 of the Destroyer's teeth when he hit him with a series of karate chops. Ouch. The Destroyer, whose mask was stained with blood, used his favorite finisher, the figure 4 leg lock. Rikidozan refused to concede and even turned his body upside down.
Wow.
Does that mean he kind of reverses the leg lock?
Reversed the figure 4 back in 1963. Wow, okay.
Yeah, that's way before Don Morocco. After 6 minutes passed, referee Fred Atkins conferred with the sub-referee. We did have a second referee, gosh darn it, Oki Shikina, of course, and halted the match, ruling it a deadlock. I guess it just meant because no one was going to give up. That's all you can get out of it.
Okay.
Looking back, the things they did in pro wrestling were quite funny at times. When the match was over, they had trouble separating the tangle of legs, which I've seen this gimmick before. So Byers second in the ring, Gorilla Monsoon, Gino Marella, you mean, and Rikidozan second, the Great Togo, cut their boot laces with scissors and removed their boots, at which time they easily untangled their legs.
Oh, okay. So
it
was the boots. It was the boots that kept them tangled.
It was so intertwined, they had to cut the boots off of them.
That's a hell of a figure 4.
I realized the boots were partly responsible for making the figure 4 lock unbreakable.
Man, there's a match I want to see. Is this one out there?
Yeah. This is out there. I'll verify in a second, but I think that's one of the matches, one of the big ones that we have. It might even be in color. The match didn't end before 9 o'clock, the normal cutoff time. Nippon TV made the extraordinary decision when they extended the program for an additional 15 minutes, delaying all scheduled programming that followed. It's possible Rikidozan thought TV viewers might think the result of their match was predetermined if the match ended within the original broadcast time. So he prolonged the duration of the match on purpose.
Thinking.
Yeah, Nippon TV management may have been in on the deal, although nobody can say that for sure. He'd have to be, because who would be calling Nippon TV to say keep airing?
Yeah, this isn't the Nitro overruns of the 1990s. I mean, we're talking.
Yeah, but Rikidozan couldn't make the call on the fly. He was in the ring.
Right.
So I suggest to you that it was a planned event, and it certainly worked with a 64% rating. Actually, it wasn't unusual in those days for a wrestling program to go off the air with a match in progress. Years later, during an interview with a former TV director, he said they prolonged the scheduled broadcast time in 2 other cases. April 62, Rikidozan versus Blassie's WWA title match, and Toyonobori versus Destroyer match in February 1965.
Okay, well, I like the realism there, trying to add a little realism that the match doesn't end at that exact moment just because that's when the television program's going to end. So add some realism to it, I guess. Yeah,
and it shows how much effort Rikidozan put into the production aspect of the television show, where it might be too cute to have yet another match. Oh, gosh, it just finished just in time for the show to be over. In order to help suspend disbelief, this one goes right through the normal cutoff time for the show, and they have to announce that they're going to stay with it till it's over. I think that gives the illusion of a legitimate, unplanned contest.
Right.
Smart guy. I mean, for everything else they might say about him, he definitely had his finger on the pulse of creating exciting television, which was super important.
I wasn't there, but it really feels like, and time again, we've run into this, it feels like he listens to advice. We heard about him sitting in the offices there in California and asking and picking the brains of the promoters there before he ever even got this thing up and going. And I'm assuming all along the way, he's listening to these guys giving their advice to him, the Destroyer or Kowalski or whomever. Just saying, what if we did this? Or what if we do that? Or what if you should do this? And it seems like he takes all of the information, he processes it, and he rolls with whatever he thinks is going to work here. And more often than not, it makes sense.
Yep. The guy was very receptive to learning and got really good advice. So there was an article in an old magazine that mentioned an incident on TV in which a TV director timidly asked Rikidozan if it would be possible for him to end his match within the broadcast time. Let's see how this goes. Rikidozan lost his temper and said, "You damn fool. How can we do such a thing?" After that, even when he could have ended his matches within the prescribed period of time, Rikidozan was said to have occasionally prolonged his match to show the Nippon TV staff that he was in charge. After this match the next morning, every newspaper reported that the Destroyer had retained the WWA World Heavyweight title. At that time, Japanese fans had no idea that he had lost it to Fred Blassie in Los Angeles 2 weeks before. This was one of the best matches Rikidozan's had in his later years. Unfortunately, no film of the match survives. Footage of the match they had 7 months later is available, but it was much less exciting than the match on May 24th. I could have sworn that we had this.
You may. It's very possible. I know there's more than one of their matches out there. So, and again, they only wrestled in 1963.
Yeah, that'll be part of a future video cast when we can go into some of this Rikidozan stuff. So now we've finally finished the World League. Now we've made it through this WWA title chasing thing with the Destroyer, and we've gone into another tour. This one's just a single show event, a fundraiser for the Tokyo Olympics, which they've already done one of these before. And this occurs on May 31st in Riki Sports Palace. Only 1,200 are coming to this one. Rikidozan's not wrestling. He's a referee for this. You have Michiaki Yoshimura defeating Gino Marella 2-1 in the main event. Semi-main is a tag match with Toyonobori and Oki defeating Baba and Gorilla Suzuki. Name change. Both those matches would appear on the TV show. Tatsuyoshi Suzuki, who had retired for family reasons all the way back in 1959, made a comeback and changed his name to Mr. Suzuki so he wouldn't be confused with Yukio Suzuki, otherwise Gorilla or Mammoth Suzuki. So we've got someone returning after a while. That was the only show. A week later, we would have Rikidozan's Wedding Celebration Pro Wrestling Competition, another single show at the Riki Sports Palace.
Wedding Celebration, a wrestling event. All right.
Yeah, interesting.
That's pro wrestling.
We would have Kentaro Oki submitting Antonio Inoki in the main event with a half Boston Crab in 42 minutes and 28 seconds to win a 9-man battle royal.
Wow, that's a hell of a long battle royal there, especially with just 9 minutes.
And this all leads into, does that say June 7th, that date? Yeah, it is June 7th. 2 days before this would be the deluxe wedding. It wasn't a regular wedding. On June 5th, Rikidozan and Kiko had a deluxe wedding without 1,800 guests. How many guests were at your wedding, Ray? I didn't have 1,800.
Just over 100, 130, something. I don't know, something like that.
That's not 1,800 though.
No, not
celebrities, movies, pop stars, politicians, sports figures, company executives went to Hotel Akura in Tokyo, and after the wedding, the couple went to Europe for their honeymoon. Kiko said in her book that the trip was their best memory of their 6-month marriage. We're giving it away again. Spoilers. Kiko was Rikidozan's 4th wife. During the war, sumo wrestlers made a provincial tour to comfort soldiers in Korea. Rikidozan visited his hometown after a 2-year absence. And it was at that time in June of 1942 that he got married for the first time. Hoping it would prevent him from leaving his hometown again, his mother made him marry a girl living in the neighboring village. In spite of his mother's efforts, he returned to Japan. In March 1943, his wife gave birth to a girl, Kim Yeon-suk. In a recent interview, Yeon-suk said she had met her father only twice before his death, but was too young to remember anything about it. First time was in 1945. When Rikidozan received a letter telling him his mother had died, he returned to his hometown only to discover she was alive and well. The family lied to him so he would visit his daughter, although a more likely scenario is that they'd hoped he would stay to work for the family since his father had passed away. I don't know, I can kind of believe both stories. Rikidozan's last reunion with his daughter took place in November 1961 before a match in Niigata. Rikidozan met his daughter at the port on a ship that transported people from Japan to North Korea after World War II. The meeting was kept secret because Rikidozan didn't want to be seen on a Korean ship. Young-suk was a very good basketball player and was allowed to board the ship as a nominal nurse. Rikidozan encouraged her to work hard so she could be on the North Korean basketball team in the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo, where they could meet again. During their meeting, she told him that her mother, Rikidozan's first wife, had passed away in 1960. Ouch. When Supreme Leader Kim Il-sung learned that the wrestler who had become a national hero in Japan was originally from the South Hamgyong province of his country, he gave favorable treatment to his daughter. Kim Yeon-suk was admitted to a university in Pyongyang, and she married a man who later became the Minister of Physical Culture, Sports, and counselor on the National Defense Commission. So that's good, because without a mom, at least Rikidozan's first child, his daughter, was set up. In 1962, Rikidozan presented a Mercedes-Benz to the Supreme Leader Kim Il-sung. Very little is known about
tossing money around.
Yeah, well, 1962 he had it. At that point, he had made it through 4 World Leagues, where he had drawn 10, 12,000 a show. His second wife, we don't know much about. She lived in Kyoto and married Rikidozan when he still had a low rank in sumo. She gave birth to a girl, Chico, and 2 boys, Yoshihiro and Mitsuo, both of whom became pro wrestlers in the 70s. Mitsuo wrestled in Mexico as Rikidozan Jr. in 1974, and Yoshihiro wrestled as Rikidozan in West Texas in 1979. So the second wife left him and married another man. Ouch. So his children were raised by his third wife, Fumiko. So she left the children as well. That's interesting.
Yeah,
At one time, Fumiko Zawa was a popular geisha in Tokyo, and she also married Rikidozan when he was a sumo wrestler. She supported him during his lean years in wrestling and was with him until they divorced in the late 50s. He stayed in touch with her and sent her a regular allowance. She died of cancer in 1964, and that is the long, sad tale of the 3 prior wives, and we'll just get through that.
Well, I thought in Japan things were a little more norm, right? This guy's getting married 4 times, and these ladies leaving not just Rikidozan, but leaving her children as well behind to go with a new man. So it's not so different than the United States, not as much as I thought it would have been. I thought there would have been more proper relationships over there, but apparently it's the same everywhere.
Yeah, and you'd think that that might pass if he was already a superstar and it was like one of the old Hollywood guys or Hollywood girls that would get married 4 or 5, 6 times. Nope, he had 2 marriages when he was just a lowly sumo guy, not even successful sumo guy.
Well, we were so deep into the story of Rikidozan and even Japanese wrestling that I didn't realize he was married once at this point. So to now find out he was married 3 times, I think it's kind of fun to go back and look at some of knowing what's about to happen with him, to go back and look at what he was doing outside of the business, besides trying to set up all these ridiculous different types of hotels, and God knows when the casino might have been coming around the corner. But, you talked about the golf course that he wanted to put together and all these other things. And meanwhile, he had a few marriages that went awry, and now he's married for the 4th time here in 63.
Yeah, I warned you. There was more news outside of the ring than there was inside. But that'll get us through to July. And then in July, all the way from July to September 1963, they have another tour called the International Summer Pro Wrestling Tournament. I began at the Riki Sports Palace. They are good at naming things. Upon closer inspection, the series can be divided into the Summer Battle and the, quote, continued Summer Battle.
Of course.
Summer Battle had 19 shows from July 12th to August 16th, just over a month. And the continued Summer Battle would have only 7 shows from August 23rd to September 13th. The ace of the foreign team was Sonny Myers, who was visiting Japan for the first time in 3 years, but he wasn't allowed to challenge Rikidozan for the International Championship during this time. There were no singles title defenses in either the first or second summer tournament, so I'm kind of ruining it before we even started. Don Jardine who would later become famous as the Spoiler and the Super Destroyer, challenged for the Asian Tag Team Championship with Myers. So that's something we have to look forward to. Other strong wrestlers competing would include Boiled Haggerty and Jack Wilson wearing the Mr. Zero mask. Darn it! Now we know who Mr. Zero is.
Mr. Zero.
So let's see. During this series, many Japanese wrestlers changed their ring names. I have been told, and it's been reported in multiple places, that the brainchild of coming up with catchy ring names for the wrestlers was Toyonobori himself. He just had a knack for it.
Okay.
Believe it or not. So we start off, we're on TV for the first match of the series on July 12th. Riki Sports Palace, we already mentioned, so you can assume the attendance is 3,000. Baba versus Endo is the first match on the TV show. The second match is Toyonobori versus Antonio Inoki. And then the main event is Yoshimura and Kentaro Oki versus Don Jardine and Mr. Zero. So where is Rikidozan? Then we go to the 19th. Another Riki Sports Palace TV taping. This is the first time this has happened on July 19th. I'm not sure if you're seeing it, but we have a singles match between Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki. And this one ends up on TV. Single fall, Baba winning in 17 minutes.
Well, that takes care of that.
Yep, but we do have Rikidozan returning for this TV taping. He and Yoshimura would defeat the team of Don Jardine and Mr. Zero 2 straight falls. Next week is the 26th, another TV taping. And we have Endo versus Inoki, Yoshimura versus Kentaro Oki. A 6-man tag with Rikidozan, Toyonobori, and Baba versus Boiled Haggerty, Jardine, and Mr. Zero. So again, I mention this every episode if I can. The product being seen on TV is a much larger impression of what Japanese pro wrestling is for the majority of the fandom than a complete house show beginning to end. Because more people are watching the TV show than are going to see the house shows. Even with 10,000, when you have 10 million watching the matches on TV compared to 10,000 going to a certain arena, that's a factor of 1,000 different. So it's really two different ways to perceive the promotion, one through TV and one through actually seeing the shows live. So that's why I remark who ends up on TV, who wins and who loses, because it matters. Yeah, I just made it to August, the end of the August 5th show, which is either 7,000 or 5,000 in Osaka. This is a non-title match, but it would be Sonny Myers and Don Jardine defeating Rikidozan and Toyonobori. Toyonobori submitted Jardine with a Boston Crab in 13. Jardine pinned Toyonobori in 5 minutes, and then Myers and Jardine win by DQ at 5 minutes for the third fall. There was an interview years later with Toyonobori, and he said that, quote, "I was sometimes offended when I had to play the role of Rikidozan's foil. Toyonobori never disobeyed Rikidozan, though, which may have been the reason Rikidozan confided his deep secrets with him. An example came out of that same interview when Toyonobori revealed that while we were taking a public bath together, Rikidozan told me that he had met his daughter on a Korean ship, a reference to Rikidozan's meeting with Young Suk in Niigata." So I think he's just remarking that he wasn't super excited to take the fall in every match that the team lost when it was on TV, but always when it was Rikidozan. But he got it. I think it helped Rikidozan trust him, and he was revealing information that he normally wouldn't reveal to his tag team partner. Moving through, I'm in August now.
We have another unmasking here, August the 9th.
Oh, goodness. Let's see. Yep, there it is. When I kind of gave this away, unfortunately. Mr. Zero was unmasked and revealed to be Jack Wilson. But Wilson continued to wear the mask, as has happened multiple times in the past. Another note about this particular show is the television broadcast had another Giant Baba versus Inoki match. So now we've got two of them. And this one, Baba pins Inoki in 10 minutes and 26 seconds. I just refer to that because we'll be talking a lot more about those two as time goes on.
Well, they had an opportunity to give Inoki a win back, kind of do a rubber match down the road, and instead it's Baba going over twice in a row here on TV. So we can kind of see where that pecking order lies. If anybody had any question as to where everything was with Inoki working Japan and Baba over the States, he comes back and he comes right back in the same spot he was when he left in regards to being over top of Antonio at this point. Again, we talked about the age difference as well. It makes sense. And then for anybody curious, Mr. Zero unmasked by Rikidozan, of course.
Yep. And to be fair, Baba had just completed almost a 2-year run in America for seasoning. And that's part of what would become tradition for a lot of these Japanese wrestlers when the promotion wanted to elevate them. They thought that at the time, it didn't make sense to elevate them within the promotion. It's harder for the fans to buy that they go from curtain jerker to main eventer in a year and a half just because they're awesome. It was easier to send them off to America to get seasoning, get more experience, maybe pick up a new move, and then they return. And how can you forget me if I don't go away type thing, where now it's coming back and it's renewed interest in this returning wrestler, and it makes it a little easier for the fans to buy that he's more experienced, and you can elevate him in one shot and just put him at the top of the card because he's come back with experience and he got to wrestle this guy in Mexico or this guy in New York, that kind of thing. So Baba had already gotten his seasoning in America. Inoki hasn't gone anywhere yet. So Baba's already got that above him. Plus he's older. So if you want to make money off this guy, then you need to do it now because he's already 7 years older than Inoki. Inoki will have time. We go to the 10th of August, and we actually have a title match for the JWA All-Asia Tag Team Championship. And we have Sonny Myers and Don Jardine defeating Rikidozan and Toyonobori 2 falls to 1. But Rikidozan and Toyonobori would retain the title because the final fall was by DQ.
Womp womp.
I know, it counts as their second defense. This tour isn't even over yet. I don't see a problem with giving the other guys the belt and taking it back later, but who am I? I'm no
We've
booker.
seen them do that before, but...
Yeah, this is in Denen Coliseum, which would become a famous Coliseum for both All Japan and New Japan in later years. Denen Coliseum. Keep that in the back of your mind. Let's see. We move through a lot of 7,000, 8,000 seat houses here for this summer tour, all over the place. Oh, here we go again. August 16th, a live broadcast in Riki Sports Palace. 2,500 were there. And we've got Kukichi Endo versus Kentaro Oki. And we also have Baba and Inoki again. And this time, it's a best 2 out of 3 falls. And Baba beats Inoki's 2 straight falls. Pins him in 11 minutes and then pins him in 4 minutes. Ouch. Doesn't even give him a single fall out of the best out of 3. That stings. So that's the end of the first summer battle. We've only made it to the middle of August.
Yeah,
so we barely made it halfway through the year 1963, guys. I told you it was a news-heavy year.
So it will indeed be a continued summer battle, as that's where we're going to pick up on the next episode as we continue on to the summer battles of 1963. But right around the corner, right after that, boy, we're going to spend some time on it, no doubt about it. Going to talk about the murder of Rikidozan on the next episode, Dan. But wow, what a fun episode. You know, I learned some new things here. I see Baba comes back and Inoki's not faring too well in the ring, and it's airing on television almost every time we see them in the ring here in 63. It appears they're televising the matches and Inoki's coming out on the losing end, but he's gaining momentum, I think, slowly. Even in losing, he's getting on television more than he was before. It's Inoki.
That's what I would say, glass half full. At least you're ending up on TV so they can see you, and you're losing to a guy that you already know the promotion is looking to push to the moon. So it's not like this guy's going to beat you 3 times on TV and then disappear or start jobbing to everybody. This guy's moving up. So you losing to him in another couple months, if they keep going with it, it's like you're losing to the champion. They will remember that you were losing to the guy that will become champion. It doesn't hurt quite as much if you think of it that way.
So I usually go in and I change the font size here on your show notes for my terrible eyesight. And so I'm at a size the 13 in the font size right here. And I'm at, we have 123 pages in show notes, guys, for 1963. And now I made it through my version of them. We're on page 75. So we still have 50 pages to go. We got a lot to go through on the next episode of 63 as well. But it's just a lot of interesting things have already transpired. We've seen some more unmaskings here and remaskings, if you will. Gorilla Suzuki, how odd maybe coincidence, maybe not. Maybe we'll find out in Brian R. Solomon's book about Gorilla Monsoon that comes out later this year, Dan. But do you think maybe, is it possible that he took the name Gorilla from Gorilla Suzuki when maybe he didn't see it as a demotion? Because it's very odd timing, to say the least, that Mammoth Suzuki becomes Gorilla Suzuki, and a couple months later we have Gorilla Monsoon.
Yeah, it does seem very coincidental, doesn't it? And even though it's being portrayed as a demotion from Mammoth Suzuki, Gorilla is not a name that I believe is commonly used in U.S. pro wrestling.
Right.
So Gorilla has meaning, or it has a bit of pop to it in America, because it's not being used there as far as I know. Now, how he came up with Monsoon at the end, I guess we'll find out when we get his book. But Gorilla Monsoon it rolls off the tongue for me.
A legendary figure in the history of wrestling. It was fun to see him come through here, but look at the tour. Haystacks Calhoun, the Destroyer's here now. I mean, the names are starting to really trickle and flow in. Unfortunately, Rikidozan's not going to be here to really thrive off of what he's done. I can't imagine what 64 would have looked like with Rikidozan still part of the JWA promoting here. But that's for the next episode, guys. Right now, we're going to leave you. Again, check it out. 123 pages is what I'm going to be uploading right there to the VIP Superfan tier. These insanely detailed show notes. Most of them are Dan's. A little bit are mine. I'll throw that in there. But most of them are Dan's, and he did a crazy ton of work. That's why these shows take so long to come out sometimes in between, especially 1963, because Dan does so much work in research and putting this together and making it make sense. And so that for those who can read it, including me and Dan, it makes sense to us as we're scrolling through as well. So tons of results, yes, but lots of great notes in between. And man, I'm excited to see, everything that's still to come here in the rest of the year.
Yeah, we kind of predicted this, that we weren't going to be able to get through all of 1963 in one shot. And that's the calm before the storm, because once his murder occurs, there is a ton of fallout in the last 3 weeks of 1963 is all about stuff, and none of it's in the ring. I think there's one show, but the rest is, what the heck do we do now?
Complete chaos.
And there's going to be a lot of discussion on what happens in the world of Japanese professional wrestling. And again, that's why we alluded to this being the end of the first era of Japanese professional wrestling, because it would fittingly end with the father of Japanese pro wrestling, Rikidozan's death.
And as we wrap up, guys, just a final reminder to go check out that VIP Superfan tier also at Patreon for the Puro Wrestling Academy video cast. We've been having a lot of fun over there. Lots of great stuff we've been covering, from the 60-minute match between Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe for the NWA World title, all the way up to Sergeant Slaughter. Well, actually, pre-Sergeant Slaughter, Bob Remus coming to town in his red, white, and blue. See, he was an Americana even before the Slaughter character, and so many great characters and talents and Japanese stars and in between that we've covered so far, Dan, over there on the video cast, and plenty more to come.
Oh my gosh, it is so fun doing that video cast. You are really missing out if you're not a part of it. Get that super VIP tier of the Patreon, because I guarantee you're going to enjoy it. You see two of us talking about Japanese pro wrestling. We're watching the matches, kind of cutting through the barrier of the Japanese commentary and providing our commentary on top of it, and doing color and play-by-play. It is so much fun. You shouldn't miss out on it. We're having a good time. I guarantee you're going to have a good time too.
And that, again, is at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Guys, go check it out. No subscription, cancel any time, but I don't think you will once you see what we offer there. And for this week, we're going to wrap things up. We'll be back soon. Since we already have all of this information in front of us, it won't be long before we return with the next episode of the Puro Academy podcast. And I'm looking forward to that, Dan, and I'll let you send them home.
All right, guys, it was a long one, but you made it through. Congratulations, you earned it. Class is dismissed.